Conservatives continue to bend over backwards to defend the Canadian Freedom Trucker protest, which last week had terrorized small businesses in Ottawa and shut down a trade route, the Ambassador Bridge, between Canada and Detroit. Now, Fox News personalities, of course, they want you to ignore the white nationalist symbols, the anti-Semitic hate speech by the organizer of the convoy, that video's going around, as well as the harassment of immigrants and even people who choose to wear masks during the pandemic. There were lots of reports of people who were not affiliated with the protest just walking to work down the street wearing a mask, and they would yell at them and sometimes even threaten to rip their masks off. Now, here's the thing. In so doing, they ripped their own mask off. And now they want you to focus on Black Lives Matter. And so here's Lara Trump. She's going to do a comparison here. And, well, there's a lot to unpack. So let's take a look.
You know, it seems like you look at these people, they don't look to be that big of a threat. And, you know, we've both Joey and Leo, you both talked about the fact that the reaction was so different here in America in the summer of 2020. When Aisha, you've talked multiple times about how frightened you were yourself going out to cover those riots in New York City. Obviously, there were people all over our country who felt threatened because cities were literally being burned to the ground. And the interest now being taken by the liberal media and by our own government seems rather interesting, considering it's not even happening in our country, and clearly these people don't seem to be that big of a threat.
Now, do you notice that? I mean, a lot of stuff going on in that video, okay? Now, according to her, the sitters being burnt to the ground. These people, though, well, they're not a threat. They're not a threat. Now, I love the notion here that somehow the message from Fox News is two different things. I can't be the only person who've noticed this. Now, Laura's message is, well, these people are small, they're not a big threat. I don't know why our government and the media are focusing so much on this tiny, tiny little protest. But the other message, also from Fox News, is, well, images, headlines like this. Canadian Freedom Convoy truckers, his movement is worldwide, does not think it can be stopped. All right, again, Fox News article. We got another one. Let me pull that up. Canadian Freedom Truckers massive vaccine mandate protest convoy may smash world record. So look, that's an example. There's plenty more of how, you know, they hyped it up as being, oh, this gigantic, huge thing, 50,000 trucks, which there were nowhere near 50,000 trucks. I think at most, at peak, it was about 18,000 protesters and a few hundred trucks. And so this is what we call Schrodinger's protest. Simultaneously, the biggest thing that could ever happen, and it should happen here, because that's what they're pushing for, right? And also super tiny. Why is everybody paying attention to it? Why is the government paying attention? I don't understand. It's a tiny, very, very harmless protest. I think Fox News might need to get their story straight here. All right? Now, again, it's been credibly witnessed that the trucker rally is actually a minority of truckers. Not that many. About 85% of the truckers, 85 to 90%, are vaccinated. This is not a majority of them. And look, you have a smattering of white nationalists, conspiracy theorists, other right-wing figures that are involved in these protests. And so you look at it, you know, there's a lot of Confederate, Gadsden, and Nazi flags too. And a pretty decent size of, you know, gathering of white people. So, I mean, again, you don't like it, you don't agree with it. I mean, facts don't care about your feelings. That's who makes up the truckers. Now, you compare this then, to compare it with Black Lives Matter protesters, which numbered in the millions in multiple different countries against actual police brutality and oppression, well, that's even more ridiculous than the claim that entire cities were burnt to the ground. They weren't. Which ones were burnt down? Which cities were burnt? What was it? Portland? Hey, turns out Portland's still there, wholly intact. Atlanta's still there. Kenosha, still there. All these different places that were claimed, burnt to the ground, burnt to the ground. Really? Well, they're still there. They still exist. Now, that's not to say that fires did not actually happen. In Atlanta, Wendy's was burnt to the ground after police killed Rayshard Brooks in the parking lot. That happened. In Washington, D.C., there were small fires that set with newspaper boxes. You had arrests for those crimes. About 15 people. Kenosha, you had $11 million in property damage. That, yes, buildings were damaged, destroyed. Now, they were unfortunately isolated to predominantly black neighborhoods. And you compare the damage to that to what happened on January 6th, in which that will cost about upward to about $30 million. So now that's just the damage to the businesses. Now, as a result of the truckers, well, workers in Michigan are expected to lose about $51 million in wages due to shortages because, well, you have stuff that couldn't get through the border, that couldn't get over the bridge. And so you have people, real working people, that can't work anymore as a result of the shutdown. And so we already have a supply chain crisis. Now you're just making it worse for regular people, for workers, and for people that need the stuff. And so again, this is impacting regular working people who no longer can go to work and earn a living. How is this a pro-working class rally if you're actively hurting the working class? And it's what it's always been about. It's just, we don't want to get vaccinated because we don't care about everyone else's public health. Something, Satan, Dr. Fauci, fetal cells, or China, or something. And that's what's going on. That's what's going on here. Now, again, I support the right to protest. And I understand that protests, and I've said this, I'm consistent, it's supposed to be uncomfortable and inconvenient. This is true. And these protests have been uncomfortable and inconvenient. But they've also shut down hospitals, access to hospitals during a pandemic. They did harass regular people trying to go back and forth to work with masks, taking safety measures, and they've kept regular working people up for days at a time, honking their horns, and then bragged about it. That's not in favor of working people. And by the way, they're doing all this for something that their government doesn't even control. Again, these are U.S. border rules that say that you have to be vaccinated to come over the border. Justin Trudeau does not control that. It's the United States. But you're going to shut down Ottawa. You're going to strangle small businesses. You're going to hurt your fellow workers over this, over something that they can't even do anything about. No, it's ridiculous. And by the way, one of the big demands is from these truckers is end all mandates, all mandates, and then have Justin Trudeau step down. That's their big thing that they want to do. Yeah. So now, one more point here on the fact that this is not a popular Canadian grassroots outlet or uprising. Okay? Most Canadians, according to polling, support the COVID restrictions, the mandates. Now, they are, of course, as we all are, we're tired of the pandemic. Of course we are. Man, it's going on 3 years. It sucks. I hate it. We all hate it. But guess what? We're doing this to protect people who cannot get vaccinated, to protect people with compromised immune systems, to protect regular people, which apparently these truckers don't seem to give a shit about. But anyway, in their most recent survey conducted February 4th to the 9th, a polling firm called Innovative Research Group found just about 29% of Canadians supporting the idea of the protest. 53% disapproved. In a separate survey by something called Lager, released on February 8th, they found that 62% of Canadians opposed the message that the trucker convoy protests are conveying of no vaccine mandates and less public health measures. 65% of respondents agreed that the demonstrators represented, quote, a small minority of Canadians who are only thinking about themselves. And finally, the January edition of the COVID-19 Monitor found that about 3/4 of Canadians support vaccine passports for indoor dining and gatherings, and 70% would strongly or somewhat support a vaccine mandate for all eligible adults. Researchers behind COVID-19 Monitor also find that on most issues, support has remained relatively stable for these measures throughout the pandemic. And finally, you have an analysis of some of the donations to this rally. You're not going to be surprised. Who's funding this? Well, it turns out more Americans than Canadians are funding the Freedom Rally, the truckers. 63% of the donations to the truckers, now removed by GoFundMe, came from the United States. There was another fundraiser that just had its details leaked. And it turns out, once again, you had a majority of right-wingers in the United States giving the most donations. Now, in that same leak, of course, the majority of money did come from Canadians, but from less people in Canada than in the United States. So those are the details there. It's almost as if wealthier Canadians are putting up most of the money for the Canadian protests, whereas right-wingers in the United States are giving the rest. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. So this is a right-wing astroturf movement. This is not a populist movement. And at the end of the day, it actually more or less aligns with business interests. While they're blocking the roads and preventing stuff from getting through and preventing people from going to work, you have CEOs that are raising prices. And what are they doing? They're blaming supply chain issues, which again, all these corporations are richer than they were before the pandemic started and are continuing to get richer and raising their prices. And they're also blaming vaccine mandates. Interesting. And by the way, the other thing that none of these truckers seem to be talking about is actual changes in the trucking industry. For example, wages. For example, benefits, working conditions. How truckers end up having to get roped into massive debt by leasing or having to buy their own trucks. No conversations about that whatsoever. All the conversation is within this rally is just all about how to continue the nonsense culture war and own the libs. That's always what it's about.